I would like to welcome everybody joining us from across the country today. My name is Sue Arndt, and I'm pleased to be your moderator for today's webinar. A few notes on the technical side of things. If you have any questions during the session, please use the chat function, which appears on the taskbar at the bottom of your Zoom window, and we'll try our best to address those. There you will notice that you have the option of sending a chat to all panelists and attendees. So be sure that your chat is visible to both of those and feel free to use that. Today's session is being recorded and will be shared and available on Park People's website for future reference. We would like to open today's session by acknowledging the land that we are gathered on and expressing our gratitude for its critical connection to the health of all. We also acknowledge the enduring presence and resilience of First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people on this land. And we recognize their role as caregivers, stewards, and storytellers across Turtle Island. This acknowledgement has been formulated for Toronto, where the head office of Park People sits. However, please remember that a land acknowledgement is a personal recognition of who you are and your relationship to the land on which you find yourself, and thus your responsibility to that land. With this in mind, if you're located anywhere that is not Toronto, I encourage you to make this land acknowledgement personal to you. Park People acknowledges the land that they call home sits on the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Huron-Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. We also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit and is within the lands protected by the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Agreement. We are honored to be able to gather today as we believe that parks should play a vital role in providing shared spaces for all people and are an important space for reconciliation and decolonization. We invite you to introduce yourself in the chat window with your name and what nation's territory you're visiting from. If you don't know which nation's territory you live or work in, we encourage you to visit nativeland.ca or Whose Land, which we've linked to in the chat window. So again, my name is Sue Arndt, and I am a program manager with Park People overseeing our national programs. So Park People, for those who are new to us as an organization, helps people activate the power of parks to improve the quality of life in cities across Canada. So our national network program provides comprehensive support to grassroots community groups, nonprofit organizations, park professionals, and municipal staff across the country that are working to animate and enhance their local parks. Our national network supports over 950 park groups and is the only network in the country dedicated to helping improve our city parks. In 2021, last year, Park People launched a new program called Cornerstone Parks. And Cornerstone Parks networks and supports groups working in large urban parks in Canada. So working with park-based NGOs who share a vision of ensuring that nature is within reach for every urban Canadian. We are investing in ecological restoration and programming and seeking to maximize the contribution of Cornerstone Parks to climate resilience and biodiversity while working to improve people's connection to nature and community. A significant aspect of the work of Cornerstone Parks includes expanding shared evaluation and impact measurement activities with our partners in order to capture the environmental and social well-being outcomes of their work. So Stanley Park Ecology Society in Vancouver, High Park Nature Centre in Toronto, and Les Amis de la Montagne in Montreal are our three current partners. And over the next 3 years, we intend to grow the network through new partnerships across Canada to further support knowledge exchange, sharing of best practices, and increased access to the benefits of urban parks and programs in equity-deserving communities within our cities. So I think we all have seen, and it's been clear throughout the pandemic, that Canadians flock to city parks in never before seen numbers. And in Park People's own survey in 2020, we found that nearly 3/4 of Canadians said their appreciation for parks and green spaces has increased throughout this period. So as the use of these loved spaces increases, the rich ecosystems in our large urban parks not only makes our cities more biodiverse and climate resilient, but they do continue to provide places for people to build connections to nature, which are strongly linked to community well-being, individual well-being, and increases in pro-environmental attitudes and behaviors. So I'm very pleased to be moderating our session today that will explore how we can measure and amplify the impact that parks and their natural environments have on the health of ecosystems and the people using them. And I look forward to the discussion with our panelists on the great work happening around evaluating the benefits of Canada's urban parks. So for today's session, we will briefly hear from each of our three panelists and then have about 25 minutes or so for a rich discussion. So with that said, I'd like to start by introducing our three panelists. Ariane Camot is the Conservation Projects Manager with Stanley Park Ecology Society and is a registered professional biologist. She is originally from Montreal and did her master's degree in biology at the University of Montreal. She joined SPES in 2015 as an environmental educator, where she had the opportunity to connect people of all ages with nature in Stanley Park. In 2017, she joined the conservation team and has been planning habitat restoration and collaborative research projects within Stanley Park since then. Gia Liu currently manages the Research and Analytics Unit at the City of Toronto's Parks, Forestry and Recreation Division's Policy and Strategic Planning branch to provide decision support to improve quality of life for the public. Gia brings to the City of Toronto a decade of experience in international development cooperation, working in over a dozen countries in the global south on improving organizational and program efficiencies within non-governmental organizations and government agencies. She has worked with Plan International, the World Bank, Asia, Ministries of Health in Tanzania, Mali, Ghana, Bangladesh, as well as donors including Dubai Cares, Global Affairs Canada, Global Sanitation Fund, and African Development Bank. In Canada, Gia has developed organizational effectiveness strategies for the Ontario Trillium Foundation and created a social impact measurement toolkit for asset park people as well. She has also worked with Toronto-based design firms, Office O, and Planning Partnership. Catherine Reining is the project coordinator for Parkseek, a pan-Canadian initiative to gather information about population health impacts of parks, protected areas, and recreational facilities led by the Human Environments Analysis Laboratory at Western University. Her research interests include planning and management in parks and protected areas for human health and well-being, conservation, and environmental education. Catherine holds a Master's of Environmental Studies and Bachelor of Arts in Geography from Wilfrid Laurier University, as well as a Bachelor of Education from Brock University. So welcome to our three panelists. And with that, I will start by handing it over to Ariane to share a brief presentation with us of the work of Stanley Park Ecology Society.
All right, thank you, Sue, and good afternoon and good morning to everyone joining today. I'm just going to share my screen. Can you see this? All right. So I'll just take 5 minutes to introduce a bit the work that we do as Stanley Park Ecology Society around community stewardship. So we are based in Stanley Park, which is on the traditional land of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. And the work that we do at Stanley Park Ecology Society revolves around education, research, and conservation within Stanley Park. So there are many reasons why people come and visit Stanley Park, but overall, it's pretty much the easy access to nature from downtown Vancouver. There are many organisms that live in Stanley Park, but there are various stressors on the organisms and the ecosystems in the park. So for example, invasive plants is a big issue. I'll talk a bit more about that. Habitat fragmentation from people going off trail, such as doing some activities like mountain biking. Pollution, garbage left behind, as well as climate change, so air temperature and precipitation changing over time, sea level rise are just examples. So how can we measure the benefits of community stewardship on people and as well as on nature? So benefits to nature. So at SPES, we're really focused on bringing back biodiversity. So helping numbers of species and bringing back resilient ecosystems as well. So it's really important to remember that native species, they are adapted to living with each other. They've been doing that for thousands of years of evolution. So when there's an invasive plant that come in, such as Himalayan blackberry, that you can see on this top picture, it can create just a monoculture of one species, and that's really detrimental to vegetation and wildlife that lives in this area. So here we have community volunteers removing blackberry, and then just a few months later, once all the blackberry was removed, the soil was really rich in seed from native plants. We didn't even have to plant in there. All we added was a red osier dogwood living fence to block people from encroaching the area, and just numerous native plants grew back on their own. We didn't even have to plant in there. So that is much richer in diversity, more vegetation, and it supports more species of birds, pollinators, and other wildlife. And then what benefits does it have on people to take part in community stewardship? So a few weeks ago, Park people, we worked together on creating a survey that was sent to our volunteers. And some of the things that came out was that people were saying how joining stewardship activities increase their well-being. They have opportunity of learning and sharing knowledge with others, with nature. It gives them a sense of connection with nature and with other people. So that's just a few examples of the great benefits. And also bring people together. So here we can really see how there's a large range of people of different age. It's not every day that we get a chance to be with different people of different ages. There's a lot of people from the LGBTQ2S+ community that are joining for these programs, and then also having different people from different ethnicity, racial background. So whether you are a plant community or people community, diversity is always better. Something else that I find important to look at is if volunteers are coming back. So a lot of the volunteers are super dedicated and passionate once they start giving back to nature. So these two folks here, that's Phil and Tom. They've been volunteering in Stanley Park for removing invasive plants. They come almost every week, and they've been doing that for over a decade. So yeah, I think that's really important to towards the volunteers as well. And they share their passion with people walking by, which is also really important. So how can we leverage the great work being done? So first, it's really important that people know about an issue. So sometimes we look at a picture like this and we think, oh, it looks really healthy, it's green. But what we see here, that's the invasive English ivy. And it just takes over the forest. It can even kill trees if it's left for too long, and other plants can't. It just all competes the native species. So knowing about an issue, so it starts with education, doing long-term research, understanding how the ecosystems are being affected. It leads to caring, and then to take action. So some of the action can be doing some hands-on community stewardship work, or maybe joining to do some citizen community science. Maybe some group has some funding they can give to organizations. And then sharing that passion and knowledge by word of mouth or through collaborations, through panel with more people. So thank you. I'm gonna leave it at that for my introduction.
Thank you, Ariane. I'd like to pass it over to Gia now to share a little bit about her work.
Thanks very much, Sue. Thanks, Ariane, for that great presentation. I'm just going to share my screen. Bear with me for a second. Okay. Let me know if you can see it.
Yeah,
great. Thank you. So I'm just here to speak a little bit about what we are doing in the Parks, Forestry and Recreation Division here at the City of Toronto. The team in the division take care of, I think it's somewhere between 1,300 plus parks across the city. We have a lot of parkland, ravine systems, trees. I've got colleagues here on the line too from urban forestry. So I'll just dive right into some of the research portfolio we're undertaking right now to understand measurement in park and measure what matters in parks. Specifically, we're focusing on parks use over the next couple of years. So the broad questions that we're aiming to answer are, where do people use parks? Is it downtown areas versus or the suburbs? Who are the people who use parks? How far do they travel? Why do they use parks? What drives people to come to parks? What are their favorite things to do? As well as the value that parks provide and we've been trying to quantify it. And so a few approaches, I should say, that we're using to measure, and this presentation will be more about our approaches because we're in progress with these, is using mobile data analytics to understand the where and the who. We've recently commissioned a poll with Ipsos to understand from the Toronto population why and what they value, as well as a parks ecosystem service valuation to actually quantify the benefits that natural processes and systems and assets provide to us as humans. So I'll just go over each one really briefly. The mobile data analysis we're doing is based on what's described as a geofence. So this is High Park. This is one of our bigger parks in the city. And a geofence is essentially this, polygon or the shape that you're drawing around the park. And we're able to, with mobile scapes from the Environics analytics suite of products, look at who is kind of coming in and out of parks, how many visitors and how many visits come in and out of the parks over the course of a year. And we can get an understanding of, daily uses, weekends, weekday, time ranges. So this gives us a lot of kind of data to delve into to understand parks use. So if you imagine 1,300 plus parks across the city, it's a pretty big data set that we're delving into. So in terms of understanding the why do people use parks, what drives them, what motivates them, why are they there? The work that we're doing with Ipsos, as opposed to running a survey ourselves, is really about having results that are representative of the Toronto population. So this is just one slide out of the findings for us. And, when we're saying, 66% of respondents enjoy nature, and that's why they come to parks, because it's representative of the Toronto population, we can actually say to a degree of confidence that 66% of Torontonians enjoy nature when they come to parks. And, we had a big enough sample size to allow us to dig a little deeper into the sociodemographic subgroup analysis. So we could look at, race, indigeneity, and, age groups, gender, to see, are there certain groups of folks who are disproportionately responding differently. So this kind of answers, again, the why and what people value. The third approach, the parks ecosystem service valuation, is kind of the third in a series. Connie Pinto, who's on the line here, she in our urban forestry team had led a valuation of our urban canopy. So here's an example of what sort of data we can present or what sort of impact we can measure when we evaluate and actually quantify the benefits that nature bestows on us as humans. So energy savings, carbon sequestration, pollution removal. We ran a similar study for our ravine system in 2018, but what we're undertaking this year with collaboration with the Toronto Region Conservation Authority is, and University of Waterloo, is what the ecosystem service valuation would be for our park system. And this is important because it translates the ecological value of parks and our green spaces into, like quantified metrics, and in some cases, monetary metrics to inform planning and asset management. And so the combination of these research initiatives together then help us at the city inform decision making and planning in various strategies here. And this is just a list of where this data might be used. But yeah, this is what I had wanted to show folks, just in terms of different methods and different approaches to measuring impact in parks. Looking forward to questions and discussions later.
Thank you so much, Gia. I will pass it over to Catherine.
Okay, great. Thanks, Sue. I'll just share my screen here. Okay. So thanks everyone, and thanks for having us here today. So my research focuses on planning and management in parks and protected areas for human health and well-being, and really everything related to that: access, conservation, environmental education, and more. And so today I'm just going to share a bit about one of the projects I'm working on, which is Parkseek. And this project aims to understand the access and quality dimensions of parks, protected areas, and recreation facilities in Canada. So the Parkseek project is led by Dr. Jason Gilliland in the Human Environments Analysis Lab at Western University in London, Ontario, along with a cross-sectoral collaboration of academics, student researchers, and practitioners. And the project is supported by the Public Health Agency of Canada through the Enhanced Surveillance for Chronic Disease Prevention Program. And the purpose of this project is to build distinctly Canadian data sets, tools, approaches, and knowledge about the links between parks and population health promotion. And so through this project, we're aiming to strengthen the evidence base around the interconnections between population health and park systems, and potentially linking that to other health and sociodemographic indicators to better understand how these spaces contribute to health behaviors and outcomes in support of nature-based solutions, really. So in order for Parkseek to do this, we essentially have three objectives to our project. The first being to measure the geographic accessibility to parks, protected areas, and recreation facilities in Canada. And this is going to use novel spatial analysis techniques to do this. So this will be done for the whole country for any publicly accessible green spaces and blue spaces. Our second objective is to gauge the quality of park environments in 12 focus communities across Canada, serving as our case studies. And now we know there's an evidence to support the environments which are perceived to have higher quality, whether that be more ecological integrity, more biodiversity, also tend to support greater or improved health and well-being benefits for people that are experiencing those environments. However, there is still a lot of work that needs to be done in this area. So our goal here is to triangulate our data collection using on-site audits to assess park amenities and features. So what's actually there, what is available from a very objective perspective. We also want to conduct a national household survey of a representative sample of Canadians to capture attitudes and behaviors around parks. So the important part here is we're going to speak to both users and non-users of these spaces and really understand their behaviors, their patterns, and some of the barriers that they face in getting to these spaces. And then finally, we'll collect immediate feedback on users from their experiences and their benefits using a SmartFlow application. So real-time in situ data collection of users' experiences there. And then the final piece of this is to inventory, evaluate, and share plans, policies, and programs at all levels of government through a health equity lens to better understand the state of environmental health promotion and identify gaps moving forward. Now, nature-based solutions are determined through on-site specific natural and cultural contexts. So it was important to us to include a variety of communities in our case studies, recognizing the constraints, of course, on time and resources that we have within the project. So we will be including a mix of urban and rural communities, small and large populations, some that are more Francophone, Indigenous, etc. And therefore, we use the term community very loosely. We are working along the nature continuum, if you will, from municipal parks and recreation facilities to provincial and national parks and beyond that. And so it's important to note that we're working with the communities directly to understand their needs to make sure that this is a mutually beneficial project, which will address site-specific questions as well as kind of the broader research questions that we're hoping to get out of this project. So we're currently wrapping up year 2 out of 4 of the project. Right now, we're in a preliminary data collection stage. We are developing and refining our tools. We're piloting them, making sure that they work. And then we're really excited to actually be able to get out this summer, fingers crossed, and collect some data on the ground. We'll be visiting some of our communities as well as doing recruitment online. And then as we move into kind of the second half of year 3 and year 4 of this project, we have a large knowledge sharing and mobilization component so that we can actually assess what we found and share those findings with the community at large and kind of look towards what the next steps are going to be. We really want this project to be a stepping stone and a base to move on to further research in this area. So I will just leave my contact information up here. If you're interested in learning more about Parkseek, of course, please feel free to reach out to us or visit the website. And I'm looking forward to the discussion we're going to have now. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Catherine. Thank you all for sharing so much great information about the work that you and your colleagues are doing. I'd like to start just acknowledging that we've shared sort of perspectives from a park level, from a municipal level, and at a national scale. I'm curious, and this is a question for all of you, how can we leverage the work being done at these various scales to not only build support for the use of parks, but to learn from each other and influence decision-making on stewardship and restoration that balances the needs of the environment and the health of the environment, while also finding ways to maximize the park benefits to park users? So I think maybe we'll start with Catherine. You went last time, so we'll start with you.
Perfect. Sounds good. Yeah, it's a really important question. And I have to say, I think Ariane really framed it well in her presentation in that final slide there about how to leverage these environments. And a lot of it comes down to that knowledge sharing. As much as there's a lot of great work going on, we do still tend to work in our silos, whether that is our sectors, our organizations, and there really needs to be a cross-sectoral approach, including public health in the conversation, including park managers, including the general public, and getting those opinions, those feedback there, and really working to address that dual mandate that many park systems have of not only protecting that ecological integrity, but also providing that visitor experience. And part of that comes with education, not only for what park managers need to use, but also what visitors can do, what role they play when they visit that space, not only what they're going to benefit and enjoy out of it, but what is their responsibility as a visitor to these environments to protect it and conserve it for the next generation to come. And I would be very interested to hear what Ariane and Gia both have to say about this in their specific organizations and what they found.
Yeah, thanks, Catherine. I'm gonna maybe piggyback on the education piece, and I think it also goes both ways. I think for us, understanding what the public actually thinks and feels and their perceptions is really important, which is why we conducted the poll. And to hear from everybody in the sense that, you know, the broader Toronto public for us, you know, through a representative poll gives us a sense of, you know, what the majority thinks, but also what subgroups think. You know, so often we need to balance, you know, different wishes and different desires for parks. And I think, first of all, having good data and understanding, you know, what the public wants and the different publics, because there are so many different groups. And then, you know, sometimes you could say the silent majority and, you know, more organized groups who are, you know, interested in specific actions and changes. And, you know, that's where we're really hoping to use something concrete like data, you know, being able to demonstrate, you know, what is the value that nature is actually providing us and translating that into something, you know, that can impact the budget or investment. I think, you know, maybe for us in the city, we're trying to be a bit more pragmatic about it to translate that into action.
Yeah, I can add that so since we're a bit more working in the park and it happens a lot with the volunteers or staff for walking in the park and just being identified either as volunteers and just lots of people walking by asking questions, oh, wow, what are you doing and why are you doing this? And so there's some great conversations. Sometimes people they don't want us to remove blackberry because they're great fruits, but kind of explaining the why we're doing this. Usually, yeah, it brings it brings better understanding of what we're doing this work. And I think having volunteers talking with the public directly and sharing their passion, it's really powerful, and it's empowering for people to be able to do something for a park that they love. So if they have the opportunity to give back, learn from it, I think that's also really important and a way to leverage the spread of education around the importance of that work.
That's great. I'm curious, maybe more for Gia, but for any of you, with the work you're doing around evaluation and measuring the various, whether it's environmental or it's social, in measuring and evaluating what's happening in the park spaces around Toronto, have you seen this, or how can you see this playing a role in furthering investment and support of these spaces at a municipal level, or Catherine, maybe more nationally, or Ariane at a kind of a park-based level?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the you know, translating into metrics will allow us to better tell the story in concrete terms. You know, what the public is saying about needs in parks, you know, how parks use, you know, through our mobile data to actually understand, you know, how has park use changed, especially over the pandemic years, or pre-pandemic years, and how we're bouncing back from the pandemic. You know, that certainly informs decision making, informs planning. You know, we have a parkland strategy, which is really informing, you know, like what areas are priority areas for investment in the future. So all of these findings definitely absolutely go into support for decision making on investment, on resource allocation down the road. That's the intent.
Yeah, and I think to add to that from a national perspective, even there is still a need for that evidence base. While we do understand that nature has a lot of health and well-being benefits, and that evidence is there. What specifically that looks like, whether, and it's probably not one thing for the whole population, it's very different based on the type of environment, the population, and your needs. But having that support there and having that firm data, as Gia has mentioned, is going to help drive that conversation forward, because realistically, when we're trying to move the needle on policy and in this management space, we do need to have some kind of evidence to show for it. We need to have some kind of tangible recommendations and next step. But I think we're moving in the right direction. I think having these projects on the go and having these measures and these metrics is going to help make that much easier.
Yeah, I can add, I think having the metrics is really important to have a glimpse of what people are thinking. I'm also just thinking about the limitations sometimes of who decides to answer the surveys. Maybe it doesn't catch everyone's in these surveys, but yeah, being in the park, I realize it's really tough to quantify people's stories, but it also gives us so much information of different perspectives and point of views that people might have. So that's just one more aspect to look at it. So quantifiable data, but also qualifiable, I guess it's a bit more difficult to compare, but also important.
Thank you. And curious, I think we can all recognize that park investment and kind of quality of urban green spaces is sometimes inequitably distributed across our cities. And, you know, not everybody has the same access to the benefits that these spaces provide, or they're experiencing barriers to participating or visiting our park spaces. So I'm curious about how you've seen or how you've used evaluations or data or stories and what you're learning from on the ground work in the parks. How can you use the information that you're learning or that we're all learning to better support equitable access to the benefits of our green spaces across our cities?
I could take a stab at that one. So, I mean, I sound like a bit of a broken record at this point, but having, again, that evidence and the metrics do help. I mean, in Parkseek specifically, we're pretty early on in this. We haven't collected most of our data yet, so we will be able to have an idea of how these spaces are inequitably accessed and what kind of needs to be moved forward. We know it's there, but again, kind of unpacking it in a bit greater detail. To kind of inform the next steps. And Parkseek is really at this point a stepping stone to the next projects that are going to unpack this further and further. But I think, you know, in terms of having a solution there, well, we need more parks, we need more green space. And I know that's easier said than done, but things like having large urban parks where the majority of the population is a really great start.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe to add to Catherine's comment, having the data, I think this is where, you know, having geographically specific data is really important because it allows us to see, you know, if you're talking about distribution and inequitable distribution of park resources and green spaces, you know, around a city like Toronto, you're really kind of, you know, needing that disaggregated data to understand, and this is, you know, in our poll, but also it's primarily in our interest for the mobile analysis is, you know, certain areas of the city, you know, where let's say there are higher or low income populations, or just that disaggregated understanding, both in terms of subgroups, but also in terms of geography, to understand where do we need to kind of prioritize, where do we need to focus in on in order to address equity. So that's very much on our minds, and you know, you need to kind of design your research from the get-go with that in mind, and really kind of front load, and you know, of course, also engaging with, you know, the co-creation process of the research with different equity deserving groups, indigenous populations. I mean, that's so key. And, that's something we're trying to learn too at the city, on how to do that better and how to start that conversation early on, in the design phase so that we can co-create together, which is so important.
Yeah, just as an example to that, even with Parkseek, one of the things that we've done, as much as we have kind of this pan-Canadian idea of what we would like to do with our research questions, we have really tried to work with those communities. And so we've tweaked it. One of our communities in particular is primarily First Nations. And so in that case, instead of doing kind of our smartphone applications and the traditional plans we have for Parkseek, we're going to be doing walk-along mapping of those communities, and that will be largely for that community. It won't necessarily be shared within the larger project depending on what the community is comfortable with. And so we're trying to make those accommodations and really listen to what communities actually need and what they're going to benefit from. So I think that's a great point.
Well, I can just add, I think I agree with what Catherine said. It has to come from the people, those communities and those neighborhoods that you want to make the changes in the parks for.
So acknowledging a few of our questions are really coming from a park user perspective, and we're talking a lot about measuring park use. I guess a question for, maybe I'll start with you, Ariane, around Stanley Park specifically, is really finding ways and understanding how you and your organization balance the needs of volunteers, the needs of park users with kind of the integrity of the natural environment. And as, coming through COVID and this increased park use, as well as a lot of the effects of climate change with, flooding and various challenges that we're all experiencing in different ways. I'm curious if you have anything you want to share on how, when planning your stewardship restoration work or kind of trying to protect those spaces, what methods Stanley Park Ecology Society uses.
Yeah, if I understand the questions properly. So I think you're saying, like, during COVID, maybe people use the park a bit differently. So something that we've been using, for example, when we clear an area of blackberry, like you saw in that picture, then it really opened the space. And so we're always a bit worried if people are going to encroach that site. It's pretty bad for the soil if people decide to go in there. There are some islands in Los Lagoon as well, when it gets really dry, that people can go on, and it really people are trampling the plants that we plant. So that's a challenge, and we've worked in different ways. I think living fences. So there was this one that was weaved with red OC dogwood, trying to keep people on the trails. But yeah, going off trail is definitely an issue. It creates habitat fragmentation in the park. Back in 2006 and 2007, there were some really big windstorms that took place in Stanley Park, and it fell down over 10,000 of trees. And so part of the restoration plan was to plant as many trees as possible in these areas. I think there were 15,000 trees that were planted, and that's really people coming together. There were generous donors that supported the program. The Vancouver Park Board, the City of Vancouver, different organizations worked together. So there were lots of trees planted, which they grew really, really well. And I think they even had to cut down some because it was just too dense. But that was also really important to protect the area from people coming in and use open spaces during that time. And something that we looked at last year, we created a State of the Park report, and we wanted to look at 10 years, or it was actually 15 years after the windstorm, how the canopy cover recovered from that. And overall, there was I think it was 8% increase in canopy cover since that. So all the blowdown areas really recovered pretty well from that. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. And Gia, similarly, I guess I'm curious in the city of Toronto, with balancing that demand around park users and then maintaining the natural environments and the integrity of and those ecosystems. Is there any advice or any kind of learnings that have come through your work or your work with your colleagues?
Yeah, so I think my colleagues are probably much better positioned to answer that question in terms of the work on the ground. But I mean, I can speak to broadly that, you know, I know in the ravines, that's definitely a challenge. And what we've been finding in our survey is that, you know, there's such an overwhelming interest from the public for passive use and just to be in nature, just to walk, and you know, like I think someone mentioned forest bathing in the chat, and you know, but at the same time to maintain and to ensure the thriving of the natural systems and forested areas, especially what people are interested in, it does present a challenge. It's, you know, like it's hard to have many people walk through an area because it's beautiful and tree lined and thriving and trying to maintain the ecological integrity. So that's definitely a challenge that we're grappling with. I think, you know, building that understanding and, you know, through data first and foremost, you know, to say in our ecosystem service valuation, we are trying to quantify things like mental health benefits, right? Like what is the quantification of mental health benefits of the park system to the public, and estimating that so that we can, you know, also see, well, you know, what is the carbon sequestration value? What is the, you know, biodiversity value? And how does that shift over time? So let's say in 10 years time, we ran the study again, you know, is there a progression? Does climate change actually speed things up for us, right? Do we actually need to measure more often? So I think those are, you know, we can see it in the data that you know, the public's desire, and you know, the needs for protecting natural systems and processes, you know, it will come to a head, and it will require education and knowledge sharing, and you know, like really broad-based kind of awareness raising as well. You know, there are lots of groups who are active, you know, Friends of Parks groups, of course, that are working with park people, you know, so those are huge communication channels and engagement channels, who we need to reach out to do that.
Mm-hmm. And then one question I'm seeing in the chat that and you kind of is a good segue, Gia, mentioning, you know, a number of the different community park groups that are engaged in park work across Canada that, you know, park people networks as well as you each work with at some level. Are there ways local community members can get involved in a more in-depth way with any of the work that your groups are doing?
Yeah, so we have a whole public engagement unit. So for any kind of work that is happening in parks, you know, new assets or new amenities that are brought in parks, there are extensive public engagement processes that are underway. And you know, like our website, through our website, you could see all the projects that are ongoing. And because that area is really strong, and we've been, you know, having that strong public engagement, on the flip side, on the other end of the spectrum of understanding, you know, what about the people who don't come out to those events or who don't necessarily join public meetings or make it out, who often tend to be the majority, who don't say anything. That's what we're trying to balance, because we need both. We need both voices, you know, those who are advocates, and we need that advocacy in communities, and, you know, the broader population, the broader community members. So in a way, things like the poll, things like this mobile data are meant to complement you know, the existing engagement that we're doing with focused groups like Friends of Parks.
Thank you. Just recognizing we're in the last 10 minutes or so of the webinar, I did want to ask each of you if you could just briefly from your perspective, share what you would say is a key measure or indicator of success when looking at measuring the impact of large urban park spaces on the people who use them. I'll start with Catherine.
Sure. If I had to have one key measure of success, I would say that everyone who wants to is able to access these large urban parks regularly, safely, and free of whatever barriers where they're met. So whether that be the cost of travel or entry, whether it be that it's too far away, whether it be that they don't have the time, that we've come to a place where everyone can have the access that they would like.
I'm going to jump on that bandwagon. I think equity is so important because, you know, just access alone or, you know, even the health of parks alone, I think equity is really where quality of life matters the most. So I would agree with Catherine.
Yeah, I agree with that as well. And I think for us, the surveys that we do, the people surveys we do, is pretty much with our volunteers. And I think it's okay. There might be some groups that don't have the time or capacity to do volunteer work. So maybe there's a bit of unbalance. So for example, we were looking at ethnicity and racial background of people joining for volunteering, and it doesn't look really balanced as of now. Is it because maybe they don't have the capacity to volunteer, or is it what are the barriers? So understanding these barriers would be a key measurement for sure.
Mm-hmm. That's great. Thank you so much. We do have a few extra minutes, so I'm just curious. We have a couple questions, so I thought I'd just pick out. There's one for Ariane, and I know it's from somebody at the City of Toronto. Just curious around the governance structure of Stanley Park around volunteers and working with the municipality. I'm just wondering if you could share a little bit about that.
Sure. So Stanley Park Ecology Society, we're a non-for-profit organization, but we have a joint operating agreement with the Vancouver Park Board. So that's the city. And I don't know if the question is about how to get involved with the park board, but the park board has a bunch of park partners throughout Vancouver. So these are organizations like SPES and other community groups. So I would say the best way to get engaged in Vancouver parks is really looking up the local parks and what nonprofit and organizations might be already in those parks.
Mm-hmm. And one quick question for Gia just before we close up is, was just sort of a brief question around the Ipsos conducting the survey, if it was telephone or web-based, or what their methodology was for doing their survey.
We had both. So it was a panel that Ipsos had. We did, because equity was really important to us, we also had specific languaged surveys, so that the survey was translated into 2 of the major languages spoken outside of English in the city. So those were conducted online, and I think by phone as well. But it would have been through their panel and this additional equity piece.
Great, thank you. And I do want to acknowledge there are other questions that we won't have time to get to today, but we will try to do a little bit of follow-up on those. And we will definitely be hosting further sessions over the course of the next year. So just to close up for today, I really want to thank Ariane, Gia, and Catherine for taking the time out of your day to share your work with us and to participate in such a great discussion. I do wish we had more time, and I do look forward to continuing the conversation. And thanks as well to all of those who have joined us. Park People will be hosting more webinars throughout this year, and I would like to invite you to sign up for our newsletter to keep up to date about what we have coming up. So we'll just share a link to sign up, as well as information about our available resources in the chat. And then just to highlight a couple exciting moments in the year ahead for Park People to look out for is in June, we will be launching our annual Canadian City Parks report, as well as hosting a virtual Park People conference in September 21st to 23rd. So just stay tuned for more details about those. So with that, I will close up for the day and say a big thanks for being here. And we look forward to doing some follow-up and continuing the conversation.